everybody. Over the course of the past few weeks, we have looked at Gruul Aggro, looked at a deck tech, looked at card choices, looked at how to play the deck, how to sideboard with a deck against the top 10 most popular decks, nuances and weird play patterns of the deck, and flex slots and different builds of Gruul Aggro in Standard. And so here is all of those things compiled into one comprehensive deep dive. Enjoy. So this is the red-green aggro deck. It's pretty much what it says on the tin. It's playing some very, very cheap creatures to be as aggressive as possible and then finish opponent off with burn spells. Or I guess a burn spell. As far as the lands go, there's not a lot to talk about as red-green lands. I guess the big thing is Rockface Village. You can't use the red mana to cast a non-creature spell. However, it taps for waste, and you can pay red and tap it to have target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn and activate only as a sorcery. This is decent at face value, where it's just giving most of your creatures are one of those things and just giving them haste and all that stuff. But the cool part about it, ooh, I killed the burst lightning. There we go, got it back. The cool part about it is we have creatures in our deck that have Valiant. So for example, Heartfire Hero is a 1-mana 1/1. Mouse Soldier, so it's a mouse, so it can be targeted with Rockface Village. And whenever Heartfire Hero becomes a target of spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So that includes Rockface Village. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So if you have the mana for it, you can target Heartfire Hero every turn and have it grow every turn. Similar to Emberheart Challenger. Emberheart Challenger is a 2-mana 2/2 with haste and prowess. Already a decent card, but it has Valiant. When it becomes a target of spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You may play that card. That includes Rockface Village, so you can just draw an extra card every single turn when you have Emberheart Challenger and Rockface Village. So there's combos alongside combos with that card. As far as other aggressive creatures we're playing Hired Claw. It's a 1-mana 1/2 lizard, so that counts with Rockface Village. Whenever you attack with one or more lizards, Hired Claw deals 1 damage to target opponent, and you can pay 2 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on Hired Claw. Activate only if an opponent has lost life this turn and only once each turn. Just a very aggressive creature. Remember, it triggers on attack, so you can activate in blockers, because if something's blocking it, that means it has attacked and has dealt a damage. So it's a little bit bigger than it is on face value, and just having mana up and threatening that means your opponent sort of has to respect it. We're playing Pawpatch Recruit as a 2/of. It's a 1-mana 2/1 with Offspring 2. Offspring meaning you can pay an extra 2 mana to create a 1/1 token that's a copy of Pawpatch Recruit. Has Trample, and whenever a creature you control becomes a target of spell or ability an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than that creature. So this is really good when we're trying to flood the board of the creatures and your opponent has removal spells. They try to remove one creature, we have a Pawpatch Recruit, or even better, a Pawpatch Recruit with an offspring of Pawpatch Recruit, and we just get to put +1/+1 counters on other creatures, which also, by the way, triggers Valiant, like we just talked about. We're also playing Manifold Mouse, is a 2-mana 1/2 with Offspring 2. We already talked about Offspring. At the beginning of combat in your turn, target mouse you control gains your choice of Double Strike or Trample until end of turn. Almost always you're going to be selecting Double Strike, but Manifold Mouse without paying mana or relying on our opponent like Pawpatch Recruit allows us to trigger Valiant every single turn. So there are games that you play turn 1 Heartfire Hero, turn 2 Manifold Mouse, target Heartfire Hero, make it bigger, give it Double Strike, swing for 4. Next turn, trigger Manifold Mouse, target Heartfire Hero, make it bigger. It's a 3/3 now with Double Strike, swing for 6. That is like a normal play pattern. We're also playing Questing Druid. Questing Druid, we're really playing for the adventure side of it. Seek the Beast, where it's an instant where we can exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until your next end step, you may play those cards. So this is a way to allow us to go really long if they answer our initial aggro. And then its front side is you can just cast it, and it's a 1/1. Whenever you cast a spell that's white, blue, black, or red, put a +1/+1 counter on Questing Druid. Most of these cards are red, so we're putting +1/+1 counters on it. It just becomes a beast over time if it's not answered. And then Screaming Nemesis is a 3-mana 3/3 with haste. Whenever Screaming Nemesis is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. If a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. So Screaming Nemesis is incredibly difficult to block, especially when you're under threat of Monstrous Rage or Snakeskin Veil, which we'll get to in just a second. And if they do deal with it with damage, or if it's blocked, you can either kill a creature or deal that damage to the face, and then you don't have to worry about your opponent gaining life, which is the bane of these red aggressive decks anyway. As far as non-creatures, we're playing 4 Burst Lightning. Burst Lightning is an awesome shock, or we can pay 5 mana total to deal 4 damage, which can either finish off our opponent or get things out of the way. We're playing 4 Monstrous Rage. It is a 1-mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. You create a Monster Roll token attached to it. Monster Roll gives +1/+1 in Trample. So really, this gives +3/+1 in Trample. And then the +1/+1 in Trample sort of stays on it. And this is just really good to obviously, like, at face value, to like get over creatures that are blocking. If they're blocking like perfect power and toughness, you can make the toughness bigger so your creature survives and stuff tramples over. It also triggers Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger's Valiance. And if they block a Screaming Nemesis thinking they're going to kill it and Monstrous Rage saves it, some amount are going to trample, and then also the damage that is dealt to Screaming Nemesis, even if it's not lethal, you get to trigger Screaming Nemesis for, which is absolutely disgusting. Snakeskin Veil protects our creatures. 1 mana, put a +1/+1 counter target creature you control against hexproof until end of turn. It makes things bigger. It protects from opponents' removal spells. Specifically, like, also triggers Heartfire Hero, targets Emberheart Challenger, can make Screaming Nemesis bigger in combat, or really make anything bigger in combat, but really make Screaming Nemesis bigger in combat. So can it survive? It can survive and then still deal damage to stuff. We're playing 3 Innkeeper's Talent. Innkeeper's Talent is a 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Again, triggers Valiant in these mice. Also, just like making our creatures bigger every single combat is pretty gross. I can level it up to have permanents I control with counters on them, get ward 1, which is pretty solid. It combos with itself. Also, it combos, like, even if you don't put Innkeeper's counter tokens on, or counters on them, combos with Questing Druid and Heartfire Hero that have counters on them already, and even Hired Claw that has counters on them already. And then you can pay 4 mana to level it up to level 3, where if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on the permanent or player, which means every single combat you put 2 +1/+1 counters on things. Snakeskin Veil puts 2. Whenever Heartfire Hero or Questing Druid get counters, they get 2. Just gross. Or again, I keep forgetting about Hired Claw, but Hired Claw as well. So in the main deck, you are being as aggressive as possible, making your creatures really big, comboing off of these Valiant things, and just trying to beat your opponent quickly. As far as the sideboard goes, we're playing 3 Lithomanic Barrage, mostly for the Dimir deck, also decent against the white deck. Torch the Tower is really good against other aggressive decks, also decent against the Enduring cards, being able to exile them so they don't come back. We're playing 2 Scorching Shot, dealing 5 damage to target creature, really good against opposing Shieldreds, especially as Shieldred is gaining more stock than the Demon in the black decks. But really, it's good against any deck that their plan is to block our creatures. We're playing 3 Urbrass Forge. Urbrass Forge is excellent against decks that want to go really long against us, and the longer they go, the bigger Urbrass Forge gets, and it's really hard for them to answer. We're playing 3 Paw Patch Formation for an answer to the Demon, also an answer to enchantments, so like the domain deck or whatever. And then if there's nothing on the battlefield, it can just replace itself and make a food, which is also totally fine. And then we're playing the 4th Questing Druid in the sideboard, deciding against decks similar to Urbrass Forge, where that are likely going to answer our primary game plan, and we need to be able to draw cards and go really long and have like grindy cards. So this is red-green aggro in Standard, one of the best decks in Standard, actually. And as far as the sideboard goes, Lithomanic Barrage against problematic creatures that are white or blue. Torch a Tower for mostly aggressive decks, also decent against the Enduring cards. Scorching Shot, good against big blockers. Urbrass Forge, we're going to be sideboarding in against decks that have a lot of removal and are likely going to go long with us. Paw Patch Formation, decent. Enchantment Hate, also good against like different flyers like in the blue deck. And then the 4th Questing Druid, again, for decks that are going to go long and that we need to grind with. So the most popular deck is Dimir Midrange. We're going to be sided in Lithomanic Barrage and Torch the Tower just to be able to deal with their creatures, and then we're going to power through the rest of the deck. However, they are looking to grind with us and go long, and they post-board, they are pretty good at dealing with our aggro, so siding in the Questing Druid's pretty solid. That being said, I'm not a big fan of Monstrous Rage. They don't have a lot of blockers to trample over anyway, that they do have a lot of removal. And I like shaving on Innkeeper's Talent and Screaming Nemesis just because they can easily deal with Screaming Nemesis with their removal, like way too easy, and we want damage to be dealt, and Innkeeper's Talent requires us to have creatures, so it's kind of tough, especially when we're bringing in so many non-creature spells. So sideboard against Dimir Midrange. The second most popular deck is Golgari Midrange. Against Golgari Midrange, we're going to decide in Scorching Shot so we can get rid of the big butted blockers. Urbrass Forge, because they're looking to go long. They have a lot of really, really good removal. And then similarly with Questing Druid. Just like before, we're going to sideboard out of our Monstrous Rage because they have so much removal, especially post-board, and I'm really not a fan of Screaming Nemesis against this deck, and that's how I sideboard against Golgari. The third most popular deck is the Mirror Match, and in fact, we're going to sideboard the same in the Mirror. We're going to sideboard the same against the Gruul Aggro deck, not necessarily the Prowess deck. So the Gruul Prowess deck's third most popular, Gruul Aggro deck's the sixth most popular, and then the Mono Red deck is the eighth most popular. We're going to sideboard the same against all of them. And we're going to sideboard in the Torch the Towers, the Scorching Shots, and because we know we're siding so much removal, again, I'm not a fan of Monstrous Rage. Monstrous Rage is such a better like game one card. I'm going to shave on Questing Druid as well, and that's how we're going to sideboard in the Mirror. The fourth most popular deck is the Esper Self Bounce deck. Lithomantic Barrage is really solid, as well as Torch the Tower again. And this is tough because they have so much removal and really good blockers. Screaming Nemesis ends up being pretty bad being 3 mana though, because they can bounce things so well. And because of all that removal, we're going to shave on Monstrous Rage, and this is how I sideboard against the Esper Pixie Esper Self Bounce deck. The fifth most popular deck is the Jeskai Convoke deck. Against Jeskai Convoke, Lithomantic Barrage is pretty solid, and frankly, other than that, we're just going to try to be faster than them. Lithomantic Barrage, by the way, can't be countered, also gets through Ward, so it's really good against Sheltered by Ghosts, which is how they beat us. And we're just going to shave on Questing Druid. We want to be as low to the ground and as aggressive as possible, and this is how I sideboard against Jeskai Convoke. We've already talked about Gruul Aggro, which is the sixth most popular deck. The seventh most popular deck is Domain. Against Domain, we're bringing in Scorching Shot to get rid of their big-butted stuff. Paw Patch Formation because they have so many enchantments. Urbrass Forge because they have board wipes and are pretty good at dealing with what we're doing. And then similarly with Questing Druid. I do not think Screaming Nemesis is very good against this deck because they are rarely looking to block. They're just gaining a bunch of life, attacking and removing us. Because they have so much removal, we don't like Monstrous Rage. And frankly, because a lot of that removal is spot removal, we're going to shave on Snakeskin Veil, and that's how I'm going to sideboard against Domain. The eighth most popular deck is Mono Red, which we've already talked about. And so we're going to go to the ninth most popular deck, which is Mono White Tokens. Against Mono White, we're bringing in Urbrass Forge because they are looking to go really, really long. We're a fan of Lithomantic Barrage, deals with their planeswalkers and problematic creatures. And I really like Questing Druid. We're going to be sideboarding out a lot of these cards that require us to have other creatures for them to be good. I'm also not a fan of Snakeskin Veil just because a lot of their removal are like literally board wipes. And Burst Lightning doesn't really do that much. We do like Monstrous Rage, even though there's a ton of removal, because we really need to get through their tokens, though. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Mono White. The 10th most popular deck is Azorius Convoke. Against Azorius Convoke, Lithomantic Barrage is awesome. We're also a fan of Scorching Shot. They're a lot more big creature-based than the Jeskai Convoke deck, so Azorius Convoke, we're sideboarding just a little bit differently. I'm also a fan of Torch the Tower. We're going to sideboard out of our Questing Druids because we really aren't looking to go long. And I really don't like Innkeeper's Talon. It just is too slow and we really need to be moving as fast as we can. And we're just going to shave on Screaming Nemesis because there's not a lot of combat that's going to be happening. There's going to be a lot of tapping down and removal, and that's pretty much it. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Azorius Convoke. So these are the non-flex slots of Red-Green Aggro in Standard. You pretty much have to play these 44 cards in the main deck and these 6 cards in the sideboard. If you want to pause the video and check these out, go ahead. But let's look at the options for the 16 cards in the main deck and the 9 cards in the sideboard. So these are our options. You're going to pick 16 of these 35 cards and 9 of these 24 cards. Let's talk about them. So notice there are some lands with this. There are only 18 lands that are non-flex slots, and the deck wants to be playing 21, maybe even 22 lands. So you're going to be selecting 4 of these lands to play. Now you can play a forest, help a little bit with your mana, be able to cast these green spells, especially if you're playing like Paw Patch Recruit or Sentinel the Nameless City or more Questing Druids or more Innkeeper's Talents. The forest might be valuable. Mountain is a great enters untapped. Red source, our deck is primarily red. Restless Ridgeline as a one-of is really nice because it's good for our mana. However, it forces us to play this enters tapped land, which is not great, but it can give us some reach in the late game. So it's much worse in the early game, much better than the late game. Up to 4 Rockface Village. Rockface Village has target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. However, the drawback is that you can only spend red mana with this land to cast creature spells, so it can make our mana much worse for non-creature spells. But by targeting Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger, it activates their abilities and can turn Emberheart Challenger into a Howling Mine and can turn Heartfire Hero into just getting an extra +1/+1 counter every single turn without devoting a card to it. Plus the haste is pretty nice as well. And then Soulstone Sanctuary is just kind of another man land. I would put this in a similar category as Restless Ridgeline. It's much worse for our mana than Restless Ridgeline, but it comes in untapped. And then it stays a creature, so we don't have to keep devoting mana to it when we activate it. So you're going to select 4 of these lands, and then we have 12 more slots to pick. You can play Burst Lightning number 3 and 4. Burst Lightning is pretty cool because it automatically triggers prowess and can get small blockers out of the way. Up to 4 Hired Claw. Hired Claw is kind of nice, especially if you play some Rockface Village, because it can gain haste, but also it's effectively a 2-power 1-drop because it deals a damage on attack and deals a damage during combat damage, and it can become bigger over time, so it can be kind of a mana sink, which is really nice. You can play it for Monastery Swiftspear if you're looking to be a little more prowessy. I mean, it's modern playable. It is just a very, very good hasty card. You can play up to 4 Torch the Tower. If you're worried about these small blockers, it's also pretty good against the Enduring cards. It's pretty good against Mosswood Dread Knight, and very, very good against other aggro decks, which aggro is pretty popular, so playing up to 4 Torch the Tower is pretty solid. Though, to be honest, I would want Torch the Tower to be Burst Lightning 5 through 8, not playing like an actual mix. Play up to 3 Pawpatch Recruit. Pawpatch Recruit is just a 2-power 1-drop with an Offspring, and it says whenever creature you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than that creature. It's very good against removal spelly decks, which are going to exist as almost every deck can capitalize off of Pawpatch Recruit, but it's just not hyper aggressive if your opponent is not removing your creatures, so we don't really want to play a playset. You can play Snakeskin Veil to protect directly protect your creatures from these removal spells. The issue with that is we're kind of a tap out deck, so it's a little hard to leave that mana up. You can play an Obliterating Bolt, pretty good against the Enduring cards and can get a lot of stuff out of the way. Deals with Zur, stuff like that. You can play Innkeeper's Talent 3 and 4. Innkeeper's Talent is a really good long-term card. Also triggers Valiant, which is really relevant. If you level it up, it can make your creatures really difficult to remove because a lot of our creatures are getting +1/+1 counters from other things anyway. And it's just a great long-term card, even if it just stays at the first level. Speaking of long-term card, we could play Questing Druid number 3 in the main deck. It allows us to effectively draw cards at instant speed, and then also if Questing Druid goes unremoved, it can get absolutely massive and just win the game on its own. Play up to 3 Sentinel of the Nameless City. Sentinel of the Nameless City is just a very good blocker if you're going to be playing against aggro decks and can apply pressure while it's blocking. They could play up to 2 Witchstalker Frenzy, which can get large things like Shieldred out of the way if we have creatures. So you're going to pick 12 of these non-lands and 4 of these lands to be added to your deck, because these are the flex slots. As far as the sideboard goes, we're going to be picking 9 of these cards. We've already talked about Burst Lightning. The Manic Barrage, very good against the blue decks, very good against the new like Azorius Convoke, Azorius Curiosity deck, stuff like that. We've already talked about Torch the Tower, but mostly for these aggro decks. Obliterating Bolt, just a way to get these things out of the way, especially these Enduring cards. Pyroclasm is decent against Convoke mostly, especially since it'll trigger prowess on a lot of our creatures, so it's unlikely to kill our creatures. It's also decent against the aggro decks because you can kind of catch them off guard. Scorching Dragonfire deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If the creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. Very good against the Enduring cards and can just get things out of the way. Scorching Shot is 2 mana sorcery, deals 5 damage to target creature, can get things like Shieldred and other stuff out of the way. Urbrash Forge is for that long game. They board into answering your creatures 1 for 1. We can play Urbrash Forge and just embrace the long game because Urbrash Forge gets better and better as time goes on. We could play an additional Witchstalker Frenzy in the sideboard, again, to get these big things out of the way if we are a very creature-heavy variant of the deck. We can play up to 2 Snakeskin Veil to continue to protect against these removal spell-heavy decks. We can play a Pawpatch formation to be able to remove enchantments, also really good against Archfiend of the Dross and like other flyers like Zur. We can play Questing Druid 3 and 4 in the sideboard instead, for similar reasons that we would play it in the main deck. And Ghost Vacuum is decent for Graveyard Hate. However, it's like the only card that actually doesn't contribute to our primary game plan. It's just Graveyard Hate. So keep that in mind if you decide to play Ghost Vacuum. So you're going to select 9 of these 24 cards to add to your sideboard and 16 of these 35 cards to add to your main deck. And you have your very own red-green aggro deck, but stock deck thing. First off, Valiant is not heroic. Valiant triggers on abilities, which means Heartfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger can trigger every single turn if you have Manifold Mouse on the battlefield, and every single turn with a little bit of help if you activate Rockface Village on those creatures, which means you can draw an extra card every single, or I guess not draw, but effectively draw an extra card every single turn on Emberheart Challenger, and put a +1/+1 counter on Heartfire Hero pretty much every turn. It also works with Innkeeper's Talon, which is so good. Remember that oftentimes it makes sense, especially if you have like a large Heartfire Hero and you have 2 Manifold Mouse, it makes sense to trample and double strike the same creature. But also it's important to do the math because sometimes you want your Heartfire Hero to die in combat, and giving that double strike wouldn't necessarily do that. And so it's really difficult, and it's important to do that combat math. If you plan on Burst Lightning your opponent for damage, you might as well Burst Lightning your Screaming Nemesis, because then it makes them not gain life for the rest of the game, which is really good for your aggro deck. But also remember, cards like Scorching Shot that are meant to get rid of opponent's creatures can also just be used on your own Screaming Nemesis to deal 5 direct damage to your opponent for 2 mana, which is very good and can often finish the game. I don't talk a lot about bluffing on this channel, but when you have a deck that famously has cards like Snakeskin Veil in their deck, leaving a green up for what seems like no reason can scare your opponent into thinking you have Snakeskin Veil, and can cause them to play in suboptimal ways to play around Snakeskin Veil even if you don't have it. And so that's important to remember as well. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.